I was exposed to Christianity, but I still had some questions. As I begin to grow older, one of the questions that I begin to have was, why is Christianity true? What is it about Christianity that makes it true? I began to take a look at the world around me, and I grew up with Muslim friends. I grew up with friends that had a background in being a Jehovah's Witness. I had friends that grew up in Catholic faith, and I had friends who just really had no idea what they believed in. Some didn't even believe in God. They just wanted to live life according to their own terms. And so I grew up surrounded by different friends, different cultures, different backgrounds. I grew up within the church, but also surrounded by different backgrounds. And I got to see some extreme cases, and I'm looking at all of this, but I'm still questioning whether this is all true or not. The Safe Haven Podcast, episode 5. I'm actually really excited for this episode because I think this episode is going to be a little bit different. I want to talk about the reasons why I believe in Christianity. What convinced me to believe in Christianity? Now, as you can see, we are outside and we're recording this episode outside because there's a reason as to why I wanted intentionally to record this episode outside. But before I get into that episode, go ahead and click the subscribe button, click the like button, join in on the family. The Safe Haven Podcast is a place where we could share the truth, where truth be told. Regardless of your faith, regardless of your background, wherever or whatever you want to talk about. The Safe Haven Podcast is a safe place to be able to talk about the truth. And so don't miss out. Click on that subscribe button, click on that like button. That way you get updates for any of our upcoming episodes. And that way you don't miss out on the release of the episodes. You can like, you could share, and share it with a family member. If this is something that you want to share with a family member, with a friend, with a neighbor, share this with them. That way they can also hear the truth. Now, I'm really, really excited for today, episode 5, because I really wanted to talk about what convinced me about Christianity. Now, as you know, I've been a Christian for a very, very long time. I actually grew up in Christianity. My mom raised us in the church. So I grew up in the church. But even though I grew up in the church, I had a lot of questions about the Christian faith. It wasn't just, oh, I believed it to believe it. Although at first when I was a kid, that was the case. You know, I did grow up surrounded obviously by the Christian faith. I grew up in church. I got to church at a very young age. My mom brought me to church roughly when I was about 8 years old. Maybe a little bit sooner than that, but from my own memory, what I recollect, I was about 8 years old when I first got to the church. And so as I was growing up in the church, I did grow up doing a lot of church activities. My childhood was in the church. So in the church, I served in a lot of activities. I first learned to play music, and I served in my church praise and worship team for many, many years. As a matter of fact, I still serve on my church praise and worship team to this day. So it's been a very long time that I've been serving in my praise and worship team. But I was also involved in children's ministry. I was also involved in junior high ministry, high school ministry, and I was very active within my church. I served in a lot of places. Although I served and I grew up in the church, as I got older, I had a lot of questions. I did have a lot of questions. It wasn't just a blind faith. You know, as I got older, I began to look at the practices, and I was still missing a why factor. You're practicing something, but you don't know exactly why you're even practicing it to begin with. And so as I was younger, that was the case. I was brought to the church and I was serving in the church, but I still did not have a reason for what I was doing. I still did not have my faith. Now, the ministry that I'm a part of, I did see a lot of things take place within the church. I grew up in the ministry of Victory Outreach, and I'm still there to this day. And growing up in the ministry of Victory Outreach, I did see a lot of things begin to happen. This ministry was formed and it was designed to be able to take people from the streets, people from a drug addiction, alcohol, perhaps, street prostitution, um, sex working, child trafficking. I mean, this ministry was designed to be able to take the people in the worst conditions in inner cities and create rehabilitation centers. And through those rehabilitation centers, provide a place where these people who grew up in these extreme conditions could be able to hear about the Word of God. And so, for those of you that are not familiar with the ministry of Victory Outreach, it was a ministry that started with the focus of reaching the drug addict, reaching the people of the streets. They would call it a church for junkies. And so that was the ministry that I was a part of. Although I was not a junkie myself, I did not grow up doing drugs, I did not grow up doing alcohol. I witnessed a lot of people transform. I witnessed that the people in the church were people that had an extreme background. They were either saved from gang violence, they were either saved from drug addiction, they were saved from prostitution. All of these people, they had an extreme story, and they had a reason as to why they really believed in Christianity. I witnessed a lot. I witnessed that Christianity could be a tool for transformation, that Christianity could change people's lives, that the teachings and the beliefs of Christianity could transform people's lives. But I still had not experienced something myself. Like I said, I grew up in the environment. I was exposed to Christianity, but I still had some questions. As I begin to grow older, one of the questions that I begin to have was, why is Christianity true? What is it about Christianity that makes it true? I began to take a look at the world around me, and I grew up with Muslim friends. I grew up with friends that had a background in being a Jehovah's Witness. I had friends that grew up in Catholic faith, and I had friends who just really had no idea what they believed in. Some didn't even believe in God. They just wanted to live life according to their own terms. And so I grew up surrounded by different friends, different cultures, different backgrounds. I grew up within the church, but also surrounded by different backgrounds. And I got to see some extreme cases, and I'm looking at all of this, but I'm still questioning whether this is all true or not. And so one of the things that really changed my heart was I first had to understand who is God. I had no idea who God is, and I had no idea or imagination of God whatsoever. I did not have this image of a supreme authority or some being outside of everything that we see around us. All I just knew is there was God, but I really didn't know who God was. I had no idea of God. I had no idea of who he was, what he looked like. And that was kind of what I was wrestling with when I was a kid. I'm just like, how do I even know that God exists? I never turned to atheism. I never turned to another religion. I was in all honesty, being vulnerable, I was afraid that there was something that I had seen these people's lives transform, but I had not had any kind of experience, enlightenment, or encounter of my own whatsoever. And so I couldn't understand what was taking place, but I was afraid. I was genuinely afraid of, what if what if God, because I'm questioning, because I'm doubting, what if God, if he's there, what if God does something to me? Like, I had no idea. I had a fear. I was afraid of leaving God. I was afraid of asking questions. I was afraid of thinking that I can doubt God. I had grown up around him, but in reality, I had no idea. And so I was afraid. I was genuinely afraid of what my life would look like if God wasn't in the picture. And that was one thing that haunted me for a little bit. I did not know who God was, but at the same time, I was afraid of experimenting with something else. I was afraid of going into another religion. I was afraid of going into atheism. I didn't know what to do, and I felt sort of trapped in this idea. If I leave God, that somehow, some way, I'm going to be punished for it. Yet at the same time, I also thought that maybe perhaps he could be true, but I just have no idea who this guy is. So that is what I was wrestling with when I was younger. Who is God? What is the reason as to why we are here? What is the purpose behind my life? These were questions that I had in my heart that I was wrestling with. And so I began to think, how can I get to know this God? How can I get to know this person? I was taught in the church prayer. I was taught in the church that prayer was talking to God. And so I prayed heavily. I prayed extensively. Just, God, show yourself to me. God, who are you? I even did the prayer of salvation. I'd probably say at least maybe, I don't know, 7, 8 times. I could recall every time there was a call to make the prayer of salvation. I always went up to the altar, and when I got to the altar, I would always repeat the prayer, and just again and again and again, I kept wanting to reaffirm, like, is this real? Is this something that I could really believe in? I just had no idea. I just kept doing it over and over and over again. But there came a point where I really had to ask myself, what do I really believe? Because I was doing a lot of work within the church, within the ministry, but I felt like I was doing this work and it had no value. It was not that it didn't have value to the other lives and to the other people, but there came a point where I really had to ask myself, what's the reason for all of this? And there were some things that I did not agree with. Why do we have to go out into the streets, and why do we have to evangelize to these people? Why do I have to go on stage and share my testimony and share my story? Why do we preach? Why do we teach? I was beginning to really question every system that the church had in place. And that was because I had no idea who God was. God hadn't done anything in my life yet, meaning that I had not come to really experience something supernatural. And one of the big factors, the very first thing that I came in contact with, was the cosmological argument. One of the biggest things about this world is, I began to ask myself, what is the reason for everything around us? If there is a purpose behind my life, and there is a purpose for everything that we see around us, what exactly what exactly is taking place? What is the reason as to why we have everything that we have around us? What's the reason for the existence of everything? These were just the questions. Why am I here? I mean, that's the beginning of it all. Like, why am I here? Why am I here? And why am I doing all of these things? Do these things really have some sort of meaning? Do these things really Are these things really important some way somehow to be able to go out and do the work of ministry? I just didn't understand it. And so I felt like everything was just meaningless. I would play for an event, I would serve at an event for church, I would show up to the church services. I kind of lived my life in the church. I didn't really experience anything personal. I didn't go to any of my school dances. I didn't go to prom. I didn't do anything outside of the church because I was afraid. But I really did have to ask myself why. What is the purpose was really the big question behind my life. What is the purpose for all of this? And so I heard the cosmological argument. I remember watching a debate. The debate that I watched that opened my mind for the first time when I was a young kid was the debate between William Lane Craig and Christopher Hitchens. That was the very first debate I ever saw when I was a young kid. And I saw Dr. William Lane Craig. He was arguing for the existence of God. And Christopher Hitchens was arguing that there is no God. There is no existence of God. There is no evidence for God. And so I'm watching these two men really lay down their case for the existence of God. One trying to prove the existence of God, one trying to disprove the existence of God. That that debate really began to open my mind because I saw a man in Christopher Hitchens who was ultimately trying to argue that God does not exist. And what was more interesting was the title of his book, God is Not Great. And I was interested in hearing his arguments because I really thought, how could a person say that God is not great? I grew up seeing things in the church and me being afraid to step out and question who is God. And I'm watching a man completely try to disprove his existence and not acknowledge his existence. So it was interesting, to say the least. It was intriguing, it was interesting, and I really wanted to hear his arguments for the existence of God. And so he began to open my mind, first and foremost, that there is no God. That was his argument. There is no God, that everything has completely evolved through natural selection, that everything has evolved over time. And so I began to just listen to the argument, and it kind of opened up my mind to the idea. Maybe we did just form into what we are now. When I grew up in high school, they teach you a little bit about evolution. We are taught about evolution in high school. And so it wasn't something that didn't make sense. It was something that was logical, and it was something that really made sense to think that maybe perhaps we did evolve into who we are now. And so that really allowed me to think. That really allowed me to question. But Dr. William Lane Craig gave the existence of God, and he used the cosmological argument to prove the existence of God. And he began to talk about the world around us and how everything has been fine tuned. Now, that debate is about 3 hours long. I'm not going to go over all the details of that debate, but that's generally what the debate is about. The debate is just simply proving and disproving the existence of God. And William Lane Craig, this was the first time I had heard the cosmological argument, the fine tuning of the universe. And the argument, the cosmological argument is simple. It is that the world is completely fine tuned for life. It is completely designed to sustain life. And because the world is so fine tuned, that means that somebody or something, some sort of power, must have designed the universe that we see today. That began to move something in my heart because I did begin to see the way that everything in the world worked. One of the examples that really made me understand this cosmological argument was plants. Plants, what they do is they take in carbon dioxide and they release oxygen. Us as humans, we take in oxygen and we release carbon dioxide. And I began to learn how essential plants are for living. We need plants so that the plants can produce oxygen. And the plants live through the carbon dioxide that we produce. Now, plants can also make their own food. Sunlight is a really big source for plants. Plants begin to make their own food. And as plants begin to make their own food, then they can develop, they can produce more seed, we can get more plants, and life continues in this cycle. Now, that's just one example of things in the universe that's fine-tuned. I don't want to overcomplicate it, but that really began to resonate in my mind because it really made sense to me how detailed the universe was designed. And if the universe was really designed in this fine detail, then there had to be someone or something that really took the time to think about every single detail. As opposed to the other way around, if we really are here just through simply evolving or natural selection or survival, then that makes things a little bit more difficult because now we're talking about probability. What is the probability that everything would line up so perfectly so that life could exist? And so for me, it was really difficult to accept the argument that we just ultimately evolved into everything that we are today by chance, by natural selection, by survival. There is no way that we just randomly, without any purpose, landed where we are now. That ultimately, time, space, and matter have taken us into where we are now. Part of this cosmological argument, if the universe was designed and created by God, that also meant that God had to be outside of the universe. And so, if God is outside of the universe, that makes God timeless. He has no beginning and he has no end. Number two, that would make him spaceless. That means God is not limited to space. That means he's not a certain height, a certain depth, or a certain width. So God is spaceless, timeless, and he's also immaterial. He is not made up of the things that we see in the world today. He's not made up of materials. He's not made up of rock. He's not made up of sand. So God is greater than simply the materialistic things that we see in this world. So God is above time. God is above space or beyond space. And God ultimately is immaterial. He's not made up of anything that we can, taste, see, touch, feel. He's not made up of anything that our five senses can comprehend. So God is something greater. That began to first give me an understanding of who God was. I understood that God was spirit, meaning that he has no form. I began to understand that God was so great that God didn't even fit in this world. God doesn't fit on planet Earth. Why? Because he's so beyond. He's spaceless. He has no definition of his height, length, and width. Excuse the tongue twisting there. And so that began to convince me, okay, God is someone great. I began to really, really break away from the argument that we were just brought here by evolution, natural selection, or by chance. I began to understand we were designed, that we were placed on this earth with a purpose, that we are alive with a purpose. Somebody had an intent behind why we would exist. And so that began to really convince me of Christianity. Genesis 1:1, it says this: In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering the face of the waters. Reading the first lines of the Bible, in the beginning, we begin to see that time was created. In the beginning, God created the heavens, God created space, length, width, and height. So space is created, and the earth. All of the materialistic things that we see. We see materials, solid, liquid, gas. And we begin to see that the Bible begins to line up with the idea in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. We see that God created time, space, and matter. And so everything came together because somebody created it. And part of the reason why I'm really sharing this in my podcast today is because sometimes it's hard to really think and understand the world around us. We can read Christianity, but we really got to understand, is there really a God or not? Does God really exist? Is God who is the one behind everything that we see? If we don't know who God is and if we don't understand who God is, it makes this journey a little bit more difficult. We can live our lives how we want to live them. But there is going to come a point in this life, in our life here on earth, where we will pass away. Now, if we pass away and through natural selection, through evolution, we just pass away and we immediately just allow our bodies to disintegrate into the earth and more life forms are going to be created, that really takes away from me the sense of purpose as to why I'm here. It really takes away from me the value of life when I think of, okay, I'm just existing just by chance, and everything I do here on this earth, I can try my best to perhaps do things that can impact the next generation of people that are going to come, but sooner than later I'm going to be forgotten about. Sooner than later my body's just going to turn back into dust. I'm just going to go into the ground and I'm going to get perhaps eaten alive by worms, microbes, and things within the earth. And it really took away the sense of purpose. If there is no God, then there is no sense of purpose. There is no sense of purpose as to why we were created. But if God does exist, then there is a sense of purpose. And not only is there a sense of purpose, there is a reason behind your design. I don't want to get too far into this because I just first and foremost want this episode to serve as a way of you understanding that God does exist. And the argument for God's existence is all around you. In this world, God is the one who designed and created everything that you see. And I think it is a better argument to believe in God, a mind, someone that created everything that we see, rather than we got here by chance, that everything is so fine tuned perfectly, but it was just simply by chance. It just came to be that way. I don't think that taking God out of the equation really answers the problem. If we take God out of the equation, I believe life has no purpose. Life has no meaning. But when you add a creator, a God into the equation, then we can understand if God really created me, then what is the purpose for my existence? What is the purpose of created everything around us? And I really want you to think, and I really want you to come to understand that you were designed. Somebody thought of you. God took the time to make you. God took the time to create the conditions in which you could survive, in which you could function in this world with a purpose. The plants, the trees, the birds in the air, the sunlight, the moonlight, everything serves a very specific purpose on this world. In this universe, everything serves a very specific purpose. And I really want you to think, is God the better answer to the world around us? Or is it better to say, we just got lucky and we're here, but we don't know what's going to happen next? The cosmological argument was a very big argument for me to really believe in God. Now, to answer God, Christianity to me is the best explanation for God. But it was the cosmological argument that first led me to a belief in God, and it was Christianity that best explains who God is. And that is why I decided to become a Christian. I'm going to be making more episodes really breaking down different things, different reasons as to why I even came to the faith. This is not the only one reason as to why I came to the faith, but this was the big reason in my life that really helped solidify my belief in God. Because even though I grew up in the church, yes, I may have been influenced by the people around me to believe in God, but I had questions just like everybody else. And just because I may have been raised in the church, and maybe you might find yourself in that same position where you grew up in the church, these are questions that we have to ask ourselves. Does God really exist? And not only does God really exist, is God the reason behind everything that we see behind this universe? And if He is Christianity the best explanation for God? And we really need to really solidify our faith. We really need to be able to ask ourselves some of these questions. And in the Safe Haven podcast, I'm going to continue to make more episodes to come. I would really like to, continue to do interviews, to ask different people the reason why they believe, how they came to the faith. But one thing is for certain. I believe there is a God. And I believe Christianity best explains who that God is. That is the big reason that really made me believe and really made me turn to Christianity. Don't be afraid to ask yourself and discover who God is. Don't be afraid to ask yourself questions. Why do we do the things that we do? If there's any questions that you guys may have, drop them in the comments. Reach out to me. I'll be more than happy to share on a deeper level the existence of God. I'll be more than happy to share on a deeper level Christianity. I'll be more than happy to share faith. And if you come perhaps from a different background, it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to be able to try to discover what the truth is. And I'm here to, more than anything, help in that journey. And I hope this video helps some of you. First and foremost, believe in God, because I think that is going to be the biggest key factor here. If you can believe in the existence of God, then the journey really begins. Okay, who is God and what is the best explanation for God? That is going to be some of the episodes that I will probably film next. But today, I didn't want to go too far into it. I just wanted to explain why the cosmological argument was so big for me as a person to believe in God's existence and to believe in Christianity. And that is the reason why I'm a Christian today, because I believe God exists. And if that God exists, Christianity has the best explanation for who God is. God is the best explanation for the world around us. But Christianity, I believe, is the best explanation for God. This is the Safe Haven Podcast. If you have questions, if you want to comment anything, if you want to share a little bit more about your faith, feel free to drop anything in the comments. I would love to hear from all of you guys. I would love to hear if this has impacted you. I would love to hear if this has convinced you, just like it's convinced me. And if there's anything that you want to go over or any questions you may have, please feel free to drop them in the comments. This is a safe place. This is not a place of judgment. This is a place where the truth is going to be told, where we were going to share the truth. So feel free to comment. Feel free to drop something in the comment section, to DM, to like. This is a safe place where we're going to have more conversation. And the very first conversation we've just had, does God exist? I believe the cosmological argument really points to God existing, and Christianity is the best explanation for God. If you like this episode, like, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to share with your friends, and I cannot wait to see you guys on the next episode.